One, two, three. Welcome everyone, and to week number 3. And can you believe it? It's going so quickly yet so slowly. And today again we have Mr. Javan Bernakevitch, and he'll be leading us on the second part of his 2-week series, which so far has been really great. I know that from many notes that many of you have sent to us, so thank you, and also to the great work that many of you have done so far. What I should do also is get the screen on, shouldn't I? Well, I'll shift over to you, Javan, because that's probably a better thing, isn't it? Make host. There we go. Yeah, so it's been a really great week to have read so many of your responses, and some of you, of course, are carrying over from the first week as well, which is fine. One of the great things about this program and its format is that at any if you're not quite up to date, as it were, well, don't get too hung up about it, because you'll be able to catch up, and you'll always be able to contribute your work. It's just that the level of engagement that people will have after the program's completed won't be the same as it is during the program. So do your best, but don't get too hung up on it if you don't quite get there. The most important thing is to go through the process. All right, so Javan, you ready to fly, mate? I'll just have to... So we just need your stuff up on the screen. Have you got that right to go? Because I've just got you. I haven't got your screen shared.
Nope. Just was waiting for your introduction to complete, and then I'll take over.
No worries. Please do. Take over. I'll get back to my tunes and pretend I'm listening to you.
Thanks so much, Darren. And thanks everybody for coming back for week 2, or at least the number of you that have, and those that are going to be taking this in at a later date because of the recording. I had a lot of comments and a lot of feedback this week, and I really appreciate it. I appreciated hearing about your experiences. I had a lot of call it second kick at the cans. A lot of folks who'd worked with either Holistic Management or Alan Savory directly in the past and had issues with creating a context, and a lot of folks expressing that it was a lot easier this time. And I don't know if I can take 100% credit for that. I think most of what this is about is having multiple views of this and then just taking it from the view that you're interested in. I was rereading one of my favorite books, rereading and listening to one of my favorite books, Your Brain at Work by David Rock. And one of the things that I love about David's work, besides the fact that it's all science-based and it's all neuroscience-based, is that he speaks a lot about having the right context, the right framework for doing the work that's in front of you. And in that situation, he's talking about the mental work, the mental conversation. And in that, he was talking about how if we remove distraction, if we remove different elements within what we're trying to do in terms of our project, we have the ability to increase the amount of effective nature that we have in the thinking. We have the ability to increase the potentiality for insight. That's sort of the leap between, oh, I'm thinking about it, and oh, that's a really good idea, if we actually have focused and delineated task work. And so one of the things I would like to invite everybody to do while they're listening to this or watching this, even if it's live, or if you're listening to this after the fact, is if you are in your computer, shut down the other tabs, turn off notifications, just be present for the next hour to 2 hours. And however it is that you need to be totally present, if it's making notes, if it's doodling is a kinesthetics learner way of being totally present when it's audio visual and not necessarily they're actively doing. If it's just closing your eyes and sitting back and listening, whatever it might be, but don't divide your attention. Don't be listening to me and then checking the Bitcoin cost as it goes up. Don't go back to Facebook. Don't go back to Workplace unless you're actually trying to pick up something. And the reason why I say this, from personal experience, I've gone from a terrible multi-distractor to a singularly focused worker over the last couple of years, and it's revolutionized my work. I do much more with much less time these days. And when folks say, how the heck do you work at 80% capacity? Well, part of it is I only focus on what's in front of me. And part of it is before that, I actually focus on what's important for the day. And before that, beginning of the week, I focus on what's important for that week. And then before that, I look at the month, the season, and the year. And I cannot stress how important that is. And so if you want to learn more about that from a secondary resource, I recommend David Rock's book. It's incredible. He wrote another book called Quiet Leadership, which for any of us that are working with groups in a land base or otherwise is essential reading, in my opinion. But really focus on the work that we're doing here today and take it in. And again, if you get frustrated, if you get some friction that comes up for you, work out your battle. Work it out on paper, work it out on a document, but don't take off to the distraction, because that's how the brain works. As soon as we're not feeling super excited or that serotonin or dopamine's coming in, we then quickly go to seek more of it. And so we go to the slot machines that are the internet and the different types of applications we work on. So turn off the phone, turn off the other tabs, and just be as focused as possible. Pablo put on Cal Newport talking about deep work, and what Cal Newport has talked about is what many people have advised over the years. He's just given it a new name and a new update. And that's what we find with most of these new concepts, quote unquote new concepts. They're not new at all, but it's a new packaging for folks that potentially are deeper into the briar patch and can't actually see it. So really appreciate everybody commenting and making those points throughout the week. First and foremost, as I do with other programs, we're going to start off with successes. Now, why do we start off with successes? Well, it's an important piece because the way that our brain works, this is a hardware conversation, is that when we go to bed at night, there's these incredible clustering neuron cells called the glial cells, the GLIAL. And the glial cells are the orchestrators of the entire brain. And as they're working on the brain, they help to orchestrate resources and allocations. And then at night, when we go to bed, the glial cells take a look at all the neurological pathways that fired with great rapidity, with lots of frequency, and then says, okay, well, we should maintain those. And so the maintenance process within the brain goes about maintaining those connections. So if you told yourself multiple times during the day, this is terrible, I'm not going anywhere, the farm's not getting done, we're totally behind, the brain at night will actually go in and will reinforce every single one of those thoughts. So those thoughts will be primed and ready for you in the morning. Well, why would this happen? This seems like a design flaw. Well, if you take a look pre us domesticating everything within the planet and becoming the top apex predator, we were not the top apex predator. And so there was attributes of our brain that helped us to stay alive. And one of the great default mechanisms, or the dead man switch, if you will, was that at night, whatever thoughts we thunk kept us alive. And so those were the thoughts that we said, okay, let's strengthen those thoughts because those obviously did well for us. And if you've ever worked with somebody who was kind of caught in the past, or, well, we've never had to change it, why should we change it now? This is the actual brain process that are going on in their head. So one of the reasons why I start programs and one-on-one work with successes is because it helps us to actually reinforce a new pattern of starting with the successes that are going on. So in the chat bar, starting right now, I want everyone to write down a success or two they had going through their holistic context. There might have been frustrations, there might have been problems, but it could have been something new you learned from the webinar. It could have been a resource that we had talked about. It could have been an aha moment. It could have been a like, that's interesting, I'm going to take a look at that further. It could have been a response that I'd given over the week for folks who had sent me their context. But I want everyone, all 43 attendees at this point, including our panelists and including everybody, to talk about some of the successes they've had in this past week. And maybe it was realizing that holistic context should be a higher priority, because sometimes that's all it is. Sometimes it isn't, I actually did the work. Sometimes it was, I realized it was a bit of a priority, or I realized that I already make really good decisions. And this is just reinforcement that I'm doing exceptionally good work. So I want everyone to take a quick moment to throw down their successes onto the chat. That starts the process of us answering on the chat and breaking down the ice of, oh, this is a group, nobody really wants to hear from me. That's not the case. The more we interact, the more we put down our thoughts and individuality within this type of context, the more we create that peer-to-peer conversation. We start to see each other as valuable assets. I know somebody had mentioned, and I forget the name, my apologies, it's so great to work with personal heroes. And as Darren said, for most of us, I know I can speak for myself and for Darren because he said it, we're all on the same level, just learning as we go. Some of us have a bit more knowledge and a bit more experience, but we're all going at the same place. So I'm going to start reading these as they come in. So Corey, realizing that, I'm just going to pop out my chat bar so I get a little bit more scroll space. Realizing what assets are available to make change. That's a big one. So going through the inventory, realizing that we are exceptionally wealthy in a number of different ways. It may not be totally in a financial context, but it may be in a social context or in a material context. Phil, agree on quality of life aspects with my partner. Huge success to start to agree on things that are important for a partnership or a family. Aristi, I need to spend more time on my context and delve a little deeper. Great success. Carter, committing to writing it with my partner. Again, like getting on the same page with your partner time and time again, I find that those are the things that people appreciate the most when they talk about working with families or groups. Committing, Stefan, getting many thoughts down, interacting and agreeing on, or agreeing to disagree, finding our common ground. Robert, realizing the importance of a positive mindset, huge piece. And one of the big things a client of mine said to me recently as I was relaying a concept, it was like, do you actually see anything as a problem anymore? And I said, well, of course I do. Every once in a while it pops up, but I either see it as a lesson or slowly becoming a lesson. Slowly I'm learning from it. So great piece there. Dan Harris Pascal, revised and updated my context, recognized a few actualized future indicators, so things that were happening, fantastic. Ryan May, the three main entities in the human elements were the landowners, the enterprise, and myself. Yeah, incredible, important pieces to realize that who's involved and how they're involved, great to see. Mark reinforced on one hand, but also reminding me of items that I've neglected. Celia, I'm not an island, nor are we all, great to see. What feels to be the main limiting factor is not the one that is most important. Yeah, that's a big piece. There can be things that are limiting factors, but they may not be important to the overall whole. And that gives us a sense of where they might be placed within our priority setting of what to deal with. Anita, good to formalize in other wording what our goal intent is. Tom, went through my spot check and found I was much closer living true to my context than I was a few months ago. Also think it's time to make some changes to my SOP. Fantastic, Tom. Tom and I did a little one-on-one work ago, and I would say he's quite well skilled and a good resource for anybody to chat with. Andy's getting started and finishing a good draft. They're all good drafts until we're dead. That's the great thing about context. Until you're dead, it's just a draft. When you finish, that was the best thing you had when you finished. So great to see. Martha, we actually met face-to-face with our clients. For them, it was working on dropping the bias of time and money. Huge piece. Cyrano and Bianca, awareness of what is most important to me and prioritizing what is important according to this. I want harmony in my home more than I want to get somewhere on time. Great piece. A lot of folks find this. I found this with my own partnership. There was lots of things that I wanted to be true in my partnership and weren't. But at the end of the day, it's, are we on the same page? Are we closing the space between us? Are we actually developing what we want? Great piece there. Danilo, in order to build the HCA, I was able to have a heart-to-heart connection with my dad. Well, great question from last week, I remember, who's the primary decision maker. It gave me a better perspective of what could be my role in the whole we managed. That's an incredible success, considering last week that was a big frustration. Well done. Rory reinforced what we are both on the same page about. Yep. Sven, the recognition of the amount of support I have in my social context. While it often seems like a lonely path or endeavor, it's a true piece. You know, it's, I could spend 2 hours just talking about this. So much of our world is an anti-participatory isolationist conversation because of corporate capitalist consumerism. And, you know, when we put those things all together, we are forced, we are recommended, we are domesticated, we are trained to interact with each other on a purely needs and financial basis, which can make it very isolating. Social media does this even further so. And when we take a step back, when we actually pull back the lens and start to develop a context, we really do take ourselves out of having our lives designed for us and start to design our lives ourselves. So really appreciate you saying that. Susan, getting a month ahead on HC and planning going into a new year, developing better systems to match my quality of life and clarifying future indicators. Thanks so much for that, Susan. David, strengthening communication and further defining hopes and expectation among involved parties. Huge piece, expectations. Client once called me the expectation wrangler because they would constantly be looking at scope creep and scope seep where it got bigger and bigger, or I would try to give more and more. And great piece really to manage those expectations. Neil, improving our family daily and monthly financial and spending decision making. Neil has an exceptional holistic context and is starting to become quite skilled in this work. Billy, just starting my holistic context has opened my mind and enjoyed writing the draft. Chris, I had a moment of clarity on how I can better use my context and how to work with my partner to improve our context together. Also diving into my cognitive bias about what will help me achieve my quality of life statements. Such a big piece. So really starting to identify those cognitive biases. And some of you made the cognitive leap where when we got into cultural capitals, they started to put their cognitive biases in there. And they made the leap that beliefs and cognitive biases can sometimes be one and the same. So bravo to those of you that made that jump. Jacko, getting more clarity on vision. Laura, need to define and communicate my context honestly with myself and family. Great piece. And Chelsea, realizing that we need to give up more social commitments in order to move forward on our enterprise. Working with a couple right now, and they're festival goers. They like to do festivals. They like to really be active in that scene, and really realize that if they wanted to move to where they wanted to move to, they had to give up a little bit of that time. So short-term hardship, quote unquote hardship, for long-term reward. And again, when we start doing these in sequence and we do them with great rapidity, we realize that actually these are not hardships at all. These are the building blocks that get us to where we want to go. As I was talking about last week, the idea of eligibility, so much of this is about being eligible. And the more you take the steps, small quote unquote sacrifices for the long term, the more you're eligible for those long-term goals. And that's the big piece. That's why it's segmented in the way it is. For those of you that have taken a permaculture design course or know about the concept of orders of magnitude, as I talked about last week, you have the main order of magnitude, order one. The flow is slow, but the volume is big. And as you move up, the flow reduces and the speed picks up. And you got to think that's kind of like a context. Right here, we've got our statement of purpose, and then we move into our quality of life statements. Then we move into our behaviors and systems. And then at the end, we've got our future indicators. And so part of this is really realizing where we're going to invest the time and how those can be indicators. Those can be the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. The canaries in the coal mine referring to when canaries were used in coal mines because they had a higher rate of respiration. And if there was any sort of gas, any sort of odorless gas, they would respire more quickly, they would stop singing, and this bright, beautiful yellow thing that was singing would no longer be singing and dead, and everyone was time to get out. So canaries in the coal mine, or the indicators, is a really important piece about making sure that once you've developed this context, it doesn't stay at the back of a binder, it doesn't stay at some Google Doc that you've never seen before. And that's why I said last week, it's very important to have a graphic representation of your context, to print it out and to put it up where you have to. When I redo my context every year, it ends up becoming the background of my screen and the background of my phone. So it reminds me of what's going on. Because I live in two different places, it's not necessary for me to actually put it up on the wall because I don't look at the wall as much as I would at the computer. So last couple of successes, and then we'll jump on to the content for today. Michelle, committing to Sundays off and making that happen yesterday. Well done. And Asa, I realized that one of the reasons I've had a hard time really going in deep to making the context for our farm is that I have to start with making the holistic context for myself as a person as well. Yeah, huge piece. A lot of conversations this week, a lot of requests like, would you recommend making 3 contexts, one for me, my family, my business? I wouldn't let that get in the way of creating a context for the project, because that's really the main purpose of your time here in the course. So I wouldn't let that get in the way. So I might work backwards in that case. So make the context for the project or the whole you're working on, make the context for your family, your couple, and then move back once more. Just because as we move throughout this process, you'll hear a number of the presenters, Darren, most of all, as he's got the most amount of weeks, saying, does it work with your context? And he means that literally. It's not a toss away. He's saying, check it against your context. And again, really want to applaud Chris and Susan for saying, really going towards that response in a workplace. It is the most important piece. Should I do this? Should I do this? Well, what are you trying to do? And really, if you start taking a look, and a couple of you said this, in your decisions, should I bring on a consultant? That's one of my major testing future indicators, if you will, or my metrics of success for a consultant, is if they actually ask me questions and ask if it fits me as a whole, as opposed to just giving me a recipe. So really great to see on everybody's context and conversations, and really appreciated seeing what everyone had to offer. So we're going to start in with the context and the conversation today about decision making, because that's really the focus of what we're talking about today. So we're going to share the screen, and we're going to start the presentation. Great. And hopefully that looks good to everybody, and everybody's got a chance to take a look at that. If there are any comments, or if folks can't see things, feel free to put a chat on there. I know that there was some missed moments from last time, and great for the feedback. So this is our second session, Holistic Context 2, Spot Checks and Decision Makings. Again, we are in the winter session, at least for us in the Northern Hemisphere, summer for the Australians. And just wanted to really make this point. So if you're going back through this visually, the glial cells and success, so many times people are talking about critical thinking, but most of what they're talking about is negative scanning. They're just looking for the things that won't work. That's not critical thinking. Critical thinking is having a holistic view of everything you see and then understanding how it interacts with the whole. It's about seeing Venn diagrams. If this is my context and this is my work and they overlap, then is it one and the same? Does that have value? And we talked a little bit about the hardware and the software problem, where the way that the brain works and reinforces ideas really no longer applies to modern day conversations, because as we go throughout the day, there's not too many risks to our lives, more so to how we think about life and how we work. So again, just a huge amount of thanks to everybody who passed on their thanks and their conversations. Really appreciated that. So again, all of this is plan the work, then work the plan, and plan the work and work the plan. And PA Yeomans gave us this wonderful conversation to move forward with. So I really appreciate that PA had this conversation, because it's a pretty important piece for us to keep in mind, that this is an iterative process. It's never done. We always have drafts until we're in the grave. And then if one of our decision makers succeeds us, then they take the draft moving forward. So as we talked about before, one of the major pieces why context is so important is because it's goals over quality of life. Now, some of you during your context creation put a goal inside or above the quality of life. And of course, this is an issue, because as we have these quality of lives, we find that the goal actually starts to put at risk these quality of life and starts to really create issues there. And then more often than not, we lose all of that. So the point here really is to put quality of life over goals. So when you look at your context and you have things like, I will move on to the farm in 1 year, that is a decision. That is a goal. It's not a quality of life. Why you want to move on to the farm in a year, that's the quality of life. We have security. We have a sense of home. We have a sense of sanctuary. The reason for this is that if something major comes up in your life or in the situation within the context, and you have this, we will move on for 1 year, you put yourself at an immense risk, because what will happen is something will come up. You won't be able to move on in a year. Now, all of a sudden, your context isn't true. And you start to take on the authority or the effect of not allowing that to have come to pass. When really what you're looking for is a sense of sanctuary, a sense of place. I work where I live, maybe, is the quality of life. And it closes you off potentially to a bunch of other options that might bring you to where you want to be. So again, we put quality of life over goals because it allows us to evaluate every single possible option, be it in a farm-based, a land-based. Maybe you're one of these individuals that is nomadic at your core and you love to move from place to place. Well, a context can follow you, but a goal can be pretty site-specific. So this is an important piece as we come down to bear, because it lets us know what are the things that make good sense and what are the things that don't make good sense. And that's an important piece for all of us to keep in mind. Again, all of these pieces that we're looking at are the goals that might come into the conversation. Now, holistic management context are tools to help you build the skill of thinking and acting holistically. And that is our goal. Making a context, not our goal. It's a step towards the goal. Making decisions with it, doing some of the processes I'm about to show you today, a step towards the goal. The goal is to think and act as holistically as possible, which means if you commit yourself to this work and dive into this work, you may find yourself at the place years to come where you're not only thinking about the context of your land base, but of the community, and seriously thinking that way, in a way that I think has a lot of impact and effect. And I would credit Darren as being one of those individuals, and some of my colleagues. I would say I'm probably moving along that path. I'm not there yet, but I really applaud folks that think at that holistic level. Again, these are tools to build skills. So the tools need to be used to build the skill. And if they're not used, it can't build the skill, nor can it build the masterpiece. So really consider that unless this is used, or you use something like it, chances are the decision-making conversation is not going to change. Again, we want to know what we want, what we have to do to create what we want, and how we know it'll be true. So we want X, we need to do Y, and we'll know it's happening if we observe Z. So again, X being our statement of purpose, our daily statement of purpose, our quality of life statements, Y being our behaviors and systems, and Z being our future indicators. The whole of the project we manage, this becomes the present and future. Again, present being the inventory, future being the holistic goal, and out comes life to give us a decision. And today we're going to talk about testing. We're going to talk about how we test to see if this is indeed a good idea. Now, again, I would be remiss to say that, I would be remiss if I didn't say that Dan Palmer's work through Very Edible Gardens' work about holistic management really inspired me by taking holistic management out of a land context and into a life context. And then I was able to reapply it back to land-based with a lot of great information. So great place to start. Really appreciate Dan. And Dan actually has a brand new website called Holistic Decision Making, where he's innovating even further. And great to have a colleague across the pond where me and him have had a few conversations, and really appreciate having that back and forth conversation with him. So again, we're talking about holistic management. We're talking about different pieces here. And we're going into this idea of inventory. We talked about the inventory itself. We talked about the goal, or the holistic context, as some people call it. And now we're talking about the testing questions themselves. And that really is the purpose of the work we're doing here today, is to talk about these testing questions. So in that, we're going to skip right ahead to these testing questions, and we're going to talk about those major applications. So two major applications as we come to holistic context and decision making. One is to do a spot check or a check-in, sometimes called an enterprise audit. We're actually auditing the enterprise to see if the context is true. As both Chris and Tom were talking about, they went back and they realized, yes, indeed, some of the pieces were true now, which opens up the conversation, should we improve them, which is absolutely the answer, or absolutely the question, and absolutely the answer is yes. You should innovate and adapt and move forward with them, which is a good piece to keep in mind. So as we take a look at a number of these pieces, the major benefits of decision making is that we refine and define priorities of the whole, or the project. That means every time we make a decision, we're going back and we're saying, is this actually the case? Which means you don't even have to schedule every single one of these seasonal quarters, as I recommend and strongly invite people to do, as long as you're making decisions, because it's going to help refine. This is why I call this the only self-honing tool I know of. It also checks for issues. Are there any areas that there could be an improvement? Are there any areas that are worded weird? And that's a great piece to pick up, is that we're going to create these context in the laboratory. This is arguably the laboratory setting where we're creating ideas and words, and we're putting them on paper. And this is all theoretical. Nothing's been applied yet. Until you've put it into the field, it's just a good idea. And as we know, no plan survives first implementation. If anybody has exactly the design on paper that they put into a landscape, I really want you to email me, because I have yet to find somebody who has a plan on paper that's exactly as it was. There's always amendments, because as Bill Mollison so accurately said, the territory isn't the map, and the map isn't the territory. They're two different pieces. But as we go throughout, this changes. Now, as you and your land and the people and the decision makers change, so too will that change, which means your context, and this may be frustrating for some, but I think it's actually quite inspirational, is always out of date, because you've changed as an individual. So if that gives you the impetus to use it and to check it more, fantastic. Context also allows us to take a look at improving or looking at the weak links in our enterprises, in our businesses, in our land bases, in ourselves, in our relationships. If you're not keen at looking at weak links, this may be a bit of a frustration for you, but it means you're constantly in this state of improvement, of Kaizen, of constant improvement. It also, if you decide to use it, can provide metrics for success and monitoring. What is success for me? What is monitoring for me? What makes a great life? What makes a great day? And allows you to live upon the benefits and the priorities that you set, not that the world sets. About this time of year, there's a conversation, at least in North America, I'm not sure if it's internationally, but the powers that be decided to put in this day of advertising called Black Friday, the day before Thanksgiving, saying it was the lowest income producing day per year. And so they created a whole spectacle around it. Well, a lot of people like to rail against that and say, oh, this is crazy, this is ridiculous. Well, I can tell you, you can do more by having a holistic context and checking purchases against the context than you can posting something on Facebook or social media and saying, oh, it's a terrible thing. Because when we do this on a point-by-point basis, we actually get to the core of it, which is you become immune. You've inoculated yourself against anybody else's desires on your life, on your project, on your farm, which also means you're immune against Joel Salatin's advice against your farm. And I don't think I talked about this last time. I was working with 2 poultry farmers, and they looked at pastured poultry because they had this idea that pastured poultry was important. So they ended up looking online. They found Joel Salatin. They found the chicken tractors. They built a scale size of his chicken tractor. And then when we finished our holistic context work, they said, well, we're having a really hard time managing the property. Well, the property is only 60 meters wide by 300, 400 meters long, but it has 40 meters of elevation gain and change. And they said, we're having a problem managing the property. We should get an ATV. And so we tested this decision. Well, it turns out they decided to take a tool, a square chicken tractor on undulating landscape that has a 30 to 40 meter gain over 300 to 400 meters. And they found that one of the individuals that were within the context couldn't pull the chicken tractor, and it was being destroyed. They had to repair it. And so they were trying to get an ATV when indeed they could move to a herding model and potentially even move with ducks instead of chickens, because ducks were actually a better fit for their context. So I don't just mean that you're guarded or you're inoculated against the quote unquote powers that be that would domesticate us, but also from the shiny folks with the agrarian, the regenerative agriculture, the permaculture bent, who are saying this is the only way to farm, this is the best way to farm. You're actually testing for yourself. Which actually brings us to the main conversation here, is that we make decisions that benefit everything within the whole. Again, holistic thinking, holistic conversations. Really important piece to bring about and to bring to the forefront here. As Alan Savory said, you don't know if any decision is good or bad until you filtered it through a context. This is one of the main teachings from mindfulness throughout the centuries. And mindfulness isn't just a Buddhist term. It's one that we see in the Vedas. It's one that we see in Sanskrit. It's one that we see in Egypt. To be thoughtful, to be mindful, to be aware of the inner conversation. And as David Rock speaks about in Your Brain at Work, the research is quite clear. The people that have a better sense of what's going on internally are more eligible, apparently 60% more, for insight. The people who are less aware, who take less time to be aware of the inner conversation, are less eligible for insight, and they have to grind it out through trial and error, which is not a bad thing, but just exist as is. So decision making, let's get into the nitty gritty of making decisions and go over this process. So a guideline should be quick. We should be going through these questions from between 5 and 10 minutes. Does this mean that when you start, it'll take you longer? Absolutely. So this is where we're aiming for. This is the ideal. This is what we're trying to create. So that means that we may have to push ourselves to give an answer and then come back to it. Because if you get hung up on a question, you can stay there forever. If hung up on a question, move to the next one and return after completing them all. So again, quick. And if you get hung up, move on to the next conversation or the next decision or the next question. Really important piece. Within decision making, especially when we talk about non-people-based decisions, we assume that the decision is wrong. This is dramatically different than what the world looks like today. Normally what we do when we are working or doing this type of work, we assume it's right because our incredible brain thought of it. I thought of it. And all of a sudden we're into this conversation of me, my, I, my beliefs, my viewpoints are right. Well, one of the great things about context is it shields us against that cognitive bias that just because I thought of it, it must be right. So we assume the decision is wrong for the whole, and we test to prove the decision of merit. Is it actually of merit for what we're trying to do? So it actually has to cross the threshold of the testing questions to come into our context, and actually has to cross the holistic goal itself. When it comes to people, if we assume the worst, we'll get the worst. So we don't necessarily say that this decision is wrong, but we say, is it a good fit? And this came up in the last session I did with the agrarians, is that people found that wrong rubbed them the wrong way. It offended their sensibilities. So they said, well, instead we're going to say, is a decision a good fit for this context? Great. If that's the verbiage you need to use, I'm going to assume that this is not a good fit until it is a good fit, in which case you can actually use that for both people and non-people decisions. So might be a good choice for some folks. So guidelines, when starting, move through all the questions. That means for every single decision you make during at least this course, go move through every single one of the questions. You're going to find some examples I give you. Some of the decisions didn't go through all of the testing questions, and that's because they'd been using the process for years, and they knew what they were doing, and they were able to take the hands off the handlebars of the bicycle. They were able to take off the training wheels, and the bike didn't crash. Now, all of you, if you are new to this, don't take off the training wheels. Don't take your hands off the handlebars. Learn how to ride the bike well. Learn how to increase the speed. Learn how to increase the navigation process of this method, and then start to remove the training wheels. If you were like me, going through math and calculus, I was just always trying to go as fast as possible, and I missed a lot of steps. And there's a lot of processes that, in terms of concepts, that I missed, which didn't make me eligible to learn further concepts. And I had to go back and take some remedial conversations, even though the grades were high. I actually had lost some of the major building blocks for my cognition. So it's a really important point, is to go through each of these. Now, before I show you my version of the questions, you're going to see a number of versions of these questions, not only in this presentation, but if you look at context otherwise. Why would I do this to you? Why would I give you so many different versions? It's because there's a heart of each of these questions. There's a major through line, and the vernacular, the verbiage may be different for each question, but in essence, they are the same. Also, as I found with some clients have added questions that they felt were important, questions that actually address something that they felt wasn't as high or enough resolution that Savory or Dan or myself brought to bear. Great. This is not about you taking exactly what's given to you. It's about adapting and improvising and putting it together. Again, Bruce Lee, take the best, leave the rest, add something uniquely your own of value. So the major questions I'm going to touch upon today is the root cause, the weak link, which is social, financial, and biological, the right direction, gross profit analysis or most profitable enterprise, energy source and use, future indicators, and the gut check. Now, the outcome of any one of these decisions can be 4 different specific outcomes. If you ask if this decision is bringing us to the right direction, is making the greatest movement towards what we want, the answer could be yes, the answer could be no, the answer could be I don't know, or the answer could be it actually doesn't apply. Why is there no maybe here? Well, a maybe is a no. If you don't know, then it's a no. If it's a yes, it's a yes. If it's a maybe, it's a no. If it's a no, it's a no. And maybe you don't know. Maybe there's something about this decision that you don't know about. At that point, we then iterate or document what we don't know, because that gives us a place to actually move. That gives us an action piece. I may not know enough about this decision, and I'll show you some examples. Or it may not be applicable. You may be asking a question about should we use a certain type of accounting system within our farm? Well, that doesn't address a weak biological link of the organism you're trying to remove, or address a weak link of the biological organism you're trying to improve. That just doesn't apply. So some of these are not applicable. But it's up to you, and especially if you're working in a group of people, to use those individuals to help keep you honest. And there's a great question here that we'll get to in the long format that says, can you honestly say that you answered these questions honestly without trying to create the outcome you wanted? What a wonderful question for us to ask, as so many of us do try to answer questions in the way that we want. We try to lead people with the questions that we speak about. Pablo, sorry, can you remind us what the left column is there? Left column are icons to help create cognitive connections between the list of questions and what they could mean, at least in a mental mindscape. If you like that kind of conversation and you like symbology and iconography, fantastic. If you don't, if it's confusing, don't worry about it. Just worry about the words. Great question, Pablo. Thanks. So let's start at root cause. Now, this is one of the most important questions, and there's a reason why it was first for Alan Savory. So many of us are making decisions on things that actually don't address a weak link or the root of the problem we're working on, and end up creating more problems because we've just decided to take on a new decision. So first and foremost, does this decision get to the root cause of the problem? And sometimes you could be saying, well, there's no problem to be solved, which should be an incredible question to ask, because if that's the case, why are you taking on a new decision? When I was working with Alberta Parks, we had a wonderful conversation and story about how bull moose, which can get up over 1 ton to 2 ton, would do an incredible display before engaging in the rut, which is basically 2 moose, massive racks of antler, and they would battle it out, putting one into submission so that way they would have the opportunity to mate with the female in the area. Basically creating a superior, inferior hierarchy. And what was so interesting about that is that they would sometimes do what's called presentation for up to an hour, which is one moose like bowing down, showing its rack, the other moose bowing down, showing its rack, moving away a little bit, the other one moving away a bit, coming back, showing a little bit more. And the reason for that was, at least in nature, where every single animal has to put out the effort for the potential gain that comes up, as many entrepreneurs know, that if you take on a decision, if you take on an action that doesn't necessarily improve your situation, you don't evaluate it well in advance, you can die. And it happened many times that we would find full racked moose that were in great health that were so injured by a rut that they ended up perishing. And so they spent a lot of time evaluating. So this is really a great piece here with root cause, is really evaluate, does this decision get to the root cause of the problem? Does this action get to the root cause of this problem? Or is it just something we're doing to do? And the Kaizen School of Business had this conversation of asking why 5 to 7 times, sometimes 9 times, of, well, why is that? Well, why is that? Well, why is that? Where does that actually land? And does the solution here actually solve the root cause of the problem? Alan and Darren and others have this great piece where they take a pen and they hit themselves in the head over and over again. And they talk about, do I have an aspirin deficiency? Or where is the root cause of my problem? And they always say, well, you're hitting yourself with the pen. I would go a step further, being there's not inherently a less painful way to make this point. And the quickest way is taking a pen and hitting yourself in the head. That's actually the root cause of this problem. Or you could go further in that people actually have this issue to start off with. So this actually gets us down to the root cause of the problem. And this is really where the Lean Farm does an exceptional job of helping to take care of some of the symptoms of that, by relentlessly working on eliminating waste from the manufacturing process of farming, to make sure that we don't have any of these tripping hazards, to remove the efficiency of the process away from the conversation. So as we take a look at a great example from a friend of mine, Dakota Cohen, I was speaking about him last week. Should I purchase 11 acres that was sold from the original family farm, injuring $500,000 in debt load? And he actually called it injuring, so I'm just using his conversation. So there was a struggle with not having our own space on the farm to do what we want. But what was the root cause here? And they got down into it. What was fueling this want to buy this 11 acres is that the relationship with the parents was a bit of an issue. They still need to use machinery and livestock with the new farm, and moving half a kilometer away wouldn't actually improve the relationship. The solution: respect parents with latest and greatest ideas, because he would always burst into the kitchen and say, I've got this great idea, and their personal space, and evaluate if it was a good fit to be here with their ambitions. An update from this: he actually moved off the farm to create more space, to create what's called clarity of distance, And this is what so much of context is about, to create clarity of distance for those of us that are too close to our problems. This is why we can be so effective with somebody else's problems, but so ineffective with our own. And more, there was the conversation, as Dakota found, is that the succession plan that was implicit with his folks wasn't explicit. And so this distance allowed them to connect with succession planners from a legal and a financial standpoint, and to connect with holistic management succession planners in Saskatchewan, which is the province to the east of Alberta, which is where he lives, to create a conversation that is what he would need to actually come back to the farm and to help the succession process. So he took away the problem, found himself with distance, and was able to get to the root cause. And I was just talking with him the other day because we're working on a project together, and he was saying the value of this could not be understated. Not taking $500,000 in debt, not having a terrible relationship with his family, finding the opportunities on the landscape could not be more valuable. And so one of the things I want to impress upon you guys is this work, when I do it one-on-one with groups, is quite an expensive quote unquote expensive piece from most people's perspective, except for the fact that when we go through decisions, time and time again, the average decision that is saving the client's money is between $10,000 and $25,000. So you invest in this for a few weeks, you get it at the most discounted price I offer this for, because I'm teaching for Darren. There's a huge return on energy investment if you decide to take this on. So it's an important piece to see in terms of the value for the exchange. So as we go up to root cause here. Oh, sorry about that. Just saw a question. Kevin, Javan, I bought both Ben Hartman's book on lean farming, and we've been using a lot of techniques in our business. What other books do you recommend on Kaizen, the 5 Whys, and lean techniques? Oh, great piece. There's a lot of great lean manufacturing books out there. I haven't found anything that actually gives me more than the farming conversation. There's 2 or 3 blogs, though, and articles, Kevin, that I'll see if I can find and drum up for you. I find most of the information that I ended up picking up, I end up going into the conversation quite quickly. Do we want to direct questions back to the Q&A panel again? That's probably not a bad idea, Susan. That'll keep me aware, because the Q&A thing will light up. Great suggestion. So yes, please, let's put Q&A questions let's put questions into the Q&A box. There we go. Weak link. I felt like weak link was Alan Savory's way of injecting 3 extra questions into what he called a tight 7-question process. It was just his way of saying, I'll put a few more in here. So does this decision consider to address or create a social, economic, or ecological weak link? Social. Present. Could this decision address an existing weak link between us and those whose support we need? Future. Could this decision, due to prevailing attitudes or belief, create a weak link between us and those who support we need? So could this address something that we need, or could it create an issue? And this is an important piece, especially if we're going to make big decisions within tight communities that may not be totally amenable to the way that we're looking at it, which might mean that we have to change the way we take on a decision. Working with a client right now, they have an approach road, and there's a lot of hunters, and so a lot of folks will come out of their cars and take out their binoculars and view the house from this small little vantage point. And so they want to create a privacy issue, or they want to create some sort of privacy between them and the road. Well, taking a look at this, we crafted a solution that actually creates signage that blocks the view of their house, but then also turns them around to a farm stand right behind them. So literally taking the problem into the solution. A couple in the US I worked with, these were a couple who had done a lot of great work and continue to do a lot of great work. There's 2 different houses, a long-term relationship, trying to figure out which to live in. His business is running in-house workshops around the kitchen, around processing food. She works her corporate jobs and enjoys coming home to a sanctuary. They established if he ran the workshops in the house, this wouldn't be a good fit for them. And that allowed them to still have his house viable to be moved into, but also opened up the opportunity for the decision of transferring the garage and retransforming it into teaching and commercial kitchen for him to teach the skills of cooking and preservation. Biological. Does this action address the weakest point in the life cycle of this organism? So this is a pretty important piece. If we're taking a look at any issue in a livestock conversation or in a production conversation, we really need to take a look at pests, but also we need to take a look at potential. And so we take a look at the present. Does it address an existing weak link in the whole's biology? Could this decision create a weak link in the whole's biology going into the future? Again, whole meaning project. So great example here, working with a client, huge cattle intestinal parasites. They were taking a look at set stock rate versus rotational grazing. This was a great study that was done in the area. They were part of conventional really versus organic, because organic was open to the idea of rotational grazing. But of course, you don't have to be organic to rotational graze, and you don't have to rotationally graze to be organic. But they found that the life cycle of these intestinal parasites was 30 days because of how they grew and where they went and where the cows had to be for them to actually come back into the cow after they had left within the manure. So they found that graziers that had 45 to 120 days within the sample load had low parasitical loads, and there was huge benefits to the cattle through hormesis because they had a little bit of parasite load, but they weren't overwhelmed. So their immune system actually increased, muscle tone increased, and overall gut flora increased. A great example here of biological. Financial, does this action address the weakest link in the chain of production? So this is a great piece from Savory, a brilliant conversation, the idea of the chain of production. Resource conversion, we're taking grass, we're turning it into cattle. Product conversion, taking cattle, turning it into meat. Market conversion, taking meat, turning it into dollars. Resource conversion, grass to cattle. Product conversion, cattle to meat. Marketing conversion, meat to money. So does this action address the weakest link in the chain of production? So many times you'll have folks who will take a look at one specific issue, resource conversion in, let's say, husbandry aspect, actually the management or the product conversion, the wrap cuts or the reputation, the income and reputation. And so you ask the question, does this address an existing weak link in the whole's financials? Could this address a weak link in the whole's financials? And a great conversation with a client I had, should we produce more chickens? The problem is actually how they felt about their product. I spoke about these folks last week. Cultural capital, most farmers base their price on their neighbors. Money conversion, if we increase the price 3x, we don't need to run more birds, which is what they did, and they sold out. Because again, in most North American Western civilization conversations, price equals value, which isn't the case. Price is what we pay, value is what we get. And folks who really want to be transparent about their price say, all right, this is what it costs us to make it. This is the value compared to the other meat you have. Here's the price that's transparent, so that way we are not subsidizing our work. This is one of the primary principles in the regenerative business mentorship. We are profitable and we do not subsidize. This came directly out of working with so many farmers, Rob Avis and myself, and we realized that so many farmers subsidize the farm. And so as a prime principle, this became a good piece. And there's a great number of podcasts that Diego Footer and I did with Rob about these principles. If one of the panelists wouldn't mind finding that and putting those up, or just finding the allpointsdesign.ca/education/podcast. They're all there. So again, weak link is our second. Right direction. Will the points within our context be true if we take on this decision? So this is literally taking a decision and running it by our context. If we take on this decision, will our statement of purpose be true? Will our quality of life be true? Will our behaviors and systems be true? Will our future indicators be true? And why do we do this? Because you are new to this process, and it's really important to go through the context, and every time we go through the context, it improves. So I'll give you an example a little later on when I show you one of the tools I use for testing decisions. This was a collaboration I had a couple of years ago with two incredible designers, Wood and Water Land Design. Should we take on a 10,000 square foot home's modern landscape? They wanted 2 putting greens. They wanted 50 feet of gas line out to the dock. They wanted astroturf in certain places. Over 50% of our context was a straight no. This doesn't improve it. Well, we did it anyways with the knowledge that this was a no. And 3 months later, we revisited this process during a spot check and decided to fire the client. One of the most beautiful moments of your life is when you fire your first client and you get into the habit of firing clients that aren't a good fit. And the result was the context and all decision makers were better for this decision. And I'll go through this specific decision in depth when we get to that conversation. Thanks, Susan, for putting up that link. Right direction. So right direction, again, does this work within our context? You're going to see a couple of different pieces here, or different iterations of this. I think it's been called the greatest thrust or the greatest movement. Both of those land poorly from my clientele. Greatest thrust brings up a sexual connotation. Greatest movement brings up a defecation concept. And so I went with right direction just because I found that clients were not really focusing on what they were supposed to focus on. So again, it's all client specific. Gross profit. This is really about taking a look at two enterprises or more. So which enterprises contribute the most to covering the overhead of the business? So if you have 2 or 3 or 4 different enterprises, what are the ones that actually contribute most to the whole process? Again, gross profit is a company's total revenue equivalent to total sales minus the cost of goods sold. Regenerative business mentorship. So I was just speaking with Chris Moore before we started, and he said he's more than happy to be attributed to this example. Thanks so much, Chris. I'll make the change in the presentation later on, but Chris does an incredible job of producing some of the best pork you can imagine, called Woody Rhino Farm. But he's also an incredible consultant. He works a lot with cannabis farmers, and he works a lot with watershed restoration and education. And so he had these 2 opportunities. He has pastured pigs or consulting. And through a number of conversations we had, he was talking about how pigs are close to being as much as consulting, but he's not 100% enjoying how consulting is working within the firm that he was in. So at the surface, it was the consulting. However, diving deeper, he found that the conversion within consulting was the issue. Actually having what the paid amount was within the consulting conversation, and having a firm take a monumental portion of that value of the work. Now, recently, Chris and I were talking, and it sounds like there's been some movement on that because he was able to get down to the weak link of what the issue was with the firm he was in. He also started doing some freelancing work. And as far as I know, we haven't talked in a couple of months, although I can see his face here. And it looks like things have been moving in the right direction. So Chris, thanks so much for being open to having your example here. Energy source and use. Is the energy or money to be used in this action derived from the most appropriate source in terms of our holistic context? So is it coming from a good place? Or is it coming from a place that we can't actually regenerate from? Well, the way in which the energy or money to be used be in line with our holistic context. So not only is it coming from a good place, but are we going to use it well? Or is it going to go into somebody else's fun, somebody else's kitty? Family friend, I just found out, had their mother ask them, because they live in the States, if they would take on ownership of their entire corporation within Canada, because they're worried they're going to lose access with some law changes within Canada. Essentially, the daughter, these family friends, the daughter would be taking on all the liable risk and would be getting no payment, and the source and the use of it would actually be of tremendous issue. So the energy that would be brought by that, or potentially that could be affected by that, would be highly detrimental to the daughter. Great for the mom. Whatever the mom does, the daughter's responsible for. Created a bit of a conversation the other day as we were talking about it, but great example. Alan has a wonderful example. This problem was at a game park site in Africa, where the private dirt road leading from the main highway to the game reserve headquarters was filled with potholes. And it was becoming bumpy to the point that the drivers of the cars full of tourists were starting to complain. 2 options. And in many of your decisions, you're going to have 2, 3, 4 options you're comparing. So they could take a grader, they could take a petrol-based grader versus local hand labor. And as he looked at it, he saw that grading the road would become addictive. We'd have to repeat in the future as we were addressing a symptom and not the cause. The energy will come from fossil fuels. We'll be entering an ongoing pattern of use and dependence. And what about the money? Where will the money come from? Let's just be aware of where it's coming from. So it's going to come from a company that's a while away. It's going to go to them, their head office. They have a whole branch. And now where will it go if we pay them? It'll leave our bioregion with the grader. In this case, the energy to power the workers, if they brought on the workers, would be solar energy via the food they eat, and hence not creating an addiction to a finite resource. What about money? It would come from the same place, but where would it go? If dug by hand by locals, it would have remained in the community. Indeed, some may directly cycle back through our cafe and shop. So this is a great example of when you're taking on a decision to really take a look at the value of where that energy is coming from, where's the source and where's the use. Keith Johnson, does there exist a holistic context workbook? Yeah, Keith. I've developed an entire course in conversation with this, and the two processes that I've given you guys now is a slimmed down version of that within 2 weeks. There's an exceptionally good URL from a university down in the States that I used a lot to base my work upon. And if somebody doesn't find it before I do at the end of this conversation, I'll let them put that probably into the chat. And I imagine seeing as there's oh, no, it's not there yet. Yeah, it's philosophy something. Philosophy teacher ended up using it, but happy to find it and put it into the Google file with all of the work from this week that I'll be passing out. Great question. Oh, there's another question, but in the chat I just saw. Pablo. Pablo, thanks so much for having the name that you have. I just like saying Pablo. So energy here really means more generally external resources. Yeah, yes and no. If we're talking about a true energy conversation, literally where does the energy come from? Where do the kilojoules come from? Do the kilojoules come from a finite resource? Do they come from a renewable resource? Where does that energy come from? And is it aligned with what we want to do on the farm? So you could just be more general and say external resources. That's totally fine. But at its basic form, it is indeed energy. All right, future indicators. Halfway through our time together today. If we take this action, will it lead toward or away from the future indicators described in a holistic context? Really, will it move the needle? Will it move the needle forward? And folks who've worked with me one-on-one know that I use this a lot because really the needle is a great non-quality based conversation of, I want to be over here, I'm over here. Have we moved the needle towards where we want? Sheep farmer I was working with, should we purchase a new tractor or fix the old one? So they were looking back and forth at the major quality of life, financial abundance, resilience, and they realized that while a new tractor would have less issue down the road, potentially, it was actually better off for their financial abundance and the resilience just to fix the old one. And then as they were fixing the old one, they then tested the 3 different ways they were going to fix it: take it to a shop, do it themselves, or actually hire one of the mechanics to come to the farm and teach them how to fix it. And they found that the third option was the cheapest option because, of course, your time is worth money. And they came and they actually had a one-on-one training directly with them. And this is a great conversation about most of the folks that we think they provide programs or trainings are also open for an hour or 2 of direct consultation with direct questions. So this was a great example of that. Pablo, thank you again for allowing me to say your name. How would you differentiate future indicators and right direction? Great question. So right direction is statement of purpose, quality of life, behaviors and systems. Future and indicators is future indicators. You could put them all together. It'd be one and the same. If you wanted to, you could take out one whole question from the whole conversation. This is a bit of a carryover from Alan Savory's work, but I find more and more that this question could actually be put directly into the right direction question. It's a good piece, though, being separate. And the reason why I keep it separate is that indicators, we really should think if this is going to bring about the future we want by itself instead of like coming into the run of the whole context, because that indicator is really the watermark, the benchmark. And if we come into a decision, and I'll show you a great example next, right after the last question here, you can really see if it's going to bring about the future. Even though it makes the context true, it's not going to bring about the conversation we want in the future. So great question there. Great. Last but not least, gut check. So we have an incredible limbic system. More and more, the research is saying that the brain is actually the entire nervous system, and the mind actually exists within the nervous system because we end up having cravings and aversions to certain areas that are located within the nervous system, albeit the entire body. And in that, we have this incredible thing called the vagus nerve that it runs from the base of the spine to the jaw, to the chest, and to the stomach. If you've ever had a fight, flight, or freeze moment, you'll have realized that it usually exists in those 3 areas, which means you have to be very aware about that gut check because it is a secondary brain. It's giving us a lot of feedback, a lot of moments. So that gut check, and I love that Alan Savory did this. He said, what's the gut check? Is this going to take care of our family, our friends? Does it feel good for us? Does it feel good for them? Is this a good decision overall? And one of the things that I realized that was really important for this work is that last time I offered this work, I didn't give all of the resources that I have to give. As Darren had said, they can just use the resources we have, don't worry about it. And in experiencing an entire process here and realizing that so much of with working with clients, what my deciding factor is this in the client's best interest? I've decided to make all of these resources available to you, again, at an incredibly discounted price, because I want you guys to go as far as you can. Out of everybody I work with, you folks, I want you to go as far as you can. So part of this is the gut check of, is this a good decision? And as I was looking at this 2 weeks ago when I was preparing for this, I said, it's a great decision. Let them have it, let them go out with it, and let's have them do the work they need to do. So how do we feel about this action now after all our decisions? Will it lead to the quality of life we desire? Will it adversely affect the lives of others? So on a land design consultant, I had a good friend of mine call me up, and he said, should I purchase 10 hectares for $80,000 USD in Ecuador? And his initial gut check was yes. And he just called me up. Sometimes clients and colleagues call me up and say, I need some help to make this decision. And he hadn't had a holistic context. So I actually asked him questions based upon holistic context conversation. What's most important to you right now? What are your weak links? And within about 15 minutes, he was able to go back to this whole conversation and go, this is a no. Like, this doesn't address my weak links. This doesn't do any of this. And then I said, gut check on both sides. His gut check first was yes, but the gut check gut check afterwards was no after we went through the questions. And this is really important. Logic is the lubricant for emotions. Logic can be a great addition to the decisions we try to make. So this is an important piece to come into bear, is that sometimes without going through these decisions, our gut check is just going to be like, yeah, let's do it. And then when we finally logically or more rationally take a look at it, or take a look holistically, we can actually start to change that secondary brain, which means that the gut may not always be correct if it doesn't have all the information, which is a great piece that's been backed up by a lot of research I've been reading recently. Root cause, weak link, right direction, gross profit, energy source and use, future indicators, gut check. Of these, the only one to use if you're using 2 or 3 options is the gross profit analysis. So if you're making one decision, you skip this gross profit analysis, you just do the rest of them. It's a good point to keep in mind. So we've made our decision. What do we need to do now? We need to monitor. We need to build decision metrics. What will tell us first if this decision is producing the results we want? So if we go back, and I just spoke with this gentleman the other day, as we talked about metrics, his metrics were that his weak link of community would improve, and the fact that he had more great projects to show for people would improve. And as I talked to him recently, I brought this up, and sure enough, he had the fact that yes, community was improving and more projects were on the rise. So you build these metrics as you're monitoring. So I like using a graphic version of my context to consult. Spreadsheets are ugly and for most don't inspire joy. That being said, I'm going to show you a spreadsheet I really like. A lot of people have said it's hard on the eyes. I'm totally open to you guys improving it. I'd love to see what folks do with it. But really, the big thing here is we want to document our decisions. So that way we have a binder, a folder, a way to go back and say, okay, we made these decisions. How is our decision making improving over weeks, over months, over years? I do this electronically, and I'm looking at building an app within the next couple of years. If folks are interested in that, let's chat. I'm going to be reaching out to a number of people to help support it and to help go through the beta. Basically, I want to create something that's quick and easy to use on a mobile basis, just like all the other decision-making tools that we need to use on a farm, on a project. Have it be quick, have it be easy, have it be beautiful. So this was a couple I worked with, and they used a great program, as I showed folks in the examples, called Coggle, easy to use. And so they named the upper tree as their quality of life, statement of joy, or statement of purpose. And then they had all of their behaviors and systems. And then at the bottom here, they have their future resource base. I've seen a couple of you use Coggle, and some of the ways you guys are using it with legends is a little difficult for me to read. If you can read it well, totally ignore me. Don't worry about me. But if you want to adopt this process, statement in the middle, quality of life around the side, using behaviors and systems, and then using future indicators, fantastic. And I'll show you why this is important in a moment. Andy, you're about to see Roy G. Biv in the making. I don't know if you're going to like it, though. Dan Palmer, Very Edible Gardens, did something very quite beautiful. Did it more as a mind map. Great piece here. I was just speaking with him last week, and him and his business partners went back, and they found that so much of this was true. They had to update everything, which is a lovely moment to realize. Wood, water, and land design created something quite specifically. They have a specific modern aesthetic in a lot of what they do, and one of the partners I was working with created this, which I quite like. It was long and skinny and kind of stood out on the wall. So watch for decisions that can't be answered with your context. This indicates a gap in your context. So you may have a decision that comes up and you skip over a lot of pieces, or you say, well, this doesn't address this, this, and this. I'm going to show you an example of that. That really speaks to the fact that you need to add to your context. So you can't understand a lick of context without playing with it. It's like learning cards. You won't actually know what you're talking about until you play. So really you need to play with this to know what you're doing. So let's say something passes. Something says, yep, it's great, it's awesome, it passed. So we move ahead. That's pretty straightforward. Makes good sense, we do it. But what if it fails? What if it fails? We need to source some knowledge gaps. So if we say, I don't know, we need to figure out what we don't know and go find that knowledge. We need to interview the people necessary, and we need to improve it. We need to potentially change that decision. So the decision itself has to be changed. So instead of taking on 24 head of cattle, we take on 10. So instead of taking on 24 cow-calf pair, we take on 10 cow-calf pair. Instead of taking on Berkshire pigs, we go with the Marat breed of pigs. You know, it really is all about changing decisions or adjusting decisions. Where instead of reducing our complete hours in one of our work, should we look at working more efficiently within our work? So we sometimes just change decision. Sometimes we don't do it. This is what I've come to more and more. We don't do it. But what most people do is we do it with the knowledge of what's failed, which is hilarious to me, because most people go about this and, oh yeah, we'll do it anyways. And sure enough, what happens, happens. So again, we're becoming better decision makers. It doesn't mean we're perfect decision makers right off the bat. So a spot check. I love spot checks. Spot checks for me is one of the most incredible uses of context. It allows us to take a look at an entire project and see what's true and what isn't true. And that's incredible. That gives us a chance to actually take a look at what this system is doing, and we can do it in as short of a time as 5 to 10 minutes. My invitation, my guideline for you is every week until the end of the course, schedule your spot check now. Same bat time, same bat channel, same people. You have to get them on the phone. If you have to get them on the internet, fantastic. But basically set a time right now. Think about when it's going to be. Reach out to the folks after the call and say, great, I'm going to be meeting at this time. Does this work for you? No, this time is best. Great. We're going to meet every week, and we're going to constantly check and see what's true. And I'll show you a process for this. So we're going to check the context elements to see if each are true currently, to really see if this is the case. This, of course, means that instead of checking the course of the ship, as most people do upon landing in the port, which, how does that actually help you? We actually check it quite frequently to make sure we're in the right direction. So for those of you that says we're in the right direction, we're looking for setting our priorities, we know the direction we're headed, we know what our objectives are, this is a great task for you. For everybody else, I think it's mandatory, in my opinion. Of course, you are your own masters, because this helps to create the practice of using this work. Now, different guidelines with a spot check. You only have a yes and you only have a no. So is this true or is this not true? Again, a maybe is a no. I was working with a tax accountant, and they said, well, we created a scale from 0 to 10. And so 10 was a yes and no was a 0, and they had gradiated colors and everything else. And while I appreciate that, the point of this is to say this isn't currently true, and what am I going to do to make it true? If you gradiate, has been my experience, you say, well, it's true enough, and I'm not going to worry about it. So a yes-no conversation works really well here. And this is really about creating a ruthless clarity of vision. And this is my favorite way of looking at context. A ruthless clarity of vision is kind of like being pregnant. You can't be kind of pregnant. You can't be kind of in your ruthless clarity of vision. You are in or you are out. And that's why it's a yes or no conversation. This allows you to have a very decisive way of saying, am I in or am I out? And while there's lots of gradation, there's lots of gray area in life and in the work we do, either we feel totally satisfied with the abundance of our finances on farm or we don't. Either we're happy with our animal systems or we aren't. Either our animals are healthy and thriving or they are not. And if they are not, then let's take a look at the issues that they are and work upon them. So I want to give you a couple examples here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few ways of taking a look at context and a few ways of going through this decision-making process. And that's important because there's so many ways to look at this. And some of you are going to love some ways and some of you are going to hate other ways. So I want to show you a couple ways of doing it. And we're going to start off with the graphic way of doing it. And then we're going to move to more of a systematized way that I use just because it's a little bit more straightforward and a bit easier. So what I've done is I've taken Vetch's holistic context, because we've seen it before, and I'm going to show you a graphic way of going through and using a spot check. Just got to wait for it to come up here. Seems like it doesn't want to come up for a second. Okay, we're going to try this again. Try once more. There we go. Awesome. Great. So here we've got Vetch's holistic context. And say we were doing this with a number of people, we'd have each person be a certain color. So as we build up a new layer, we'd have, let's say, orange would be Javan. Say I was a part of Vetch. Green would be Susan. Say she's a part of Vetch in this whole. And let's say blue would be Chris. What we would do is very quickly, we would just go around and we would go yay or nay. And yay, of course, is going to be a plus, and nay is going to be a minus. So what we would do is we go around and we say, great, so holistic context, first and foremost, is this currently true for Javan? Sure. Is this true for, oh, wait a second, I've already forgotten what color Susan is. Susan's green, awesome. Is this currently true for Susan? Yep, currently true for Susan, fantastic. Is this currently true for Chris? Great, yep, super. Great, so all three of us, happy, happy, joy, joy. Then we go out into our quality of life statements. And sure enough, we go around and Javan thinks that a number of these are true. This one's true, this one's true, this one's not true, this one's true, this one's not true, this one's true, this one's true, this one's true. Great. Then we would go over to Susan, and Susan would do the same thing. Yep, she thinks we're professional. She thinks we're resilient. There was a recent issue where she agrees with me. She didn't feel like we were ethical. She does feel that we offer value to our customers. Again, this isn't about everyone having the same beliefs. It's about finding the issues. She thinks we're having good cash flow, creating meaningful livelihoods. She has a question about that, but she also thinks this is great. Awesome. And then Chris would go by, and again, Chris would have a couple of things to say here and there. Some things he would say yes to, some things he would say no to. And pretty quickly, we would get an entire conversation about what's currently true about this. Now, my experience, again, this is down the road. This is not for everybody right now, but down the road, if a quality of life statement is true like this one, chances are each of these subcategories is going to be true as well. That's not always the case, but when you're starting, just make sure you go through every single element within the context. So I'm just going to finish up here. So we'll do this one all together. So folks get what, so I would do this on every single one of these, but I'm only going to do it for this one because we've got a time constriction and there's more things to show you. Okay, so we would go through this, and basically I would then go through with my red pen, and anything that was a minus I would circle. And we'll do this on the grand scale as well, or highlight or whatever. However you want to do it best. But we want to highlight these pieces. Oh, and a few things I've forgotten. Of course, we'd put in the date, December 3rd, 2017. Great, and of course the people who are making the context conversation. So this means, if anybody is cognitively following along, our next step would then to be go in and we would be asking, blue I think was Chris. So we'd be talking to Chris and we'd be saying, Chris, great, what's the issue here about we have a business culture based on mutual respect, open communication that doesn't feel true for you? And with Chris here, we would start to get a sense of what that is. Similarly over here, we'd go through these pieces and we get a sense for all these different folks, what specifically the issues were for, I think Susan was orange, and Susan would talk about this, and Susan would talk about this. Or no, I think Susan was green. And Susan would talk about that and talk about this. And then from that, we would then take that information, we would say, great, what are we going to do about it, or how do we want to change it? So what's the action we're going to create out of this conversation? How do we want to improve this? What's the action? So again, this is a pretty quick, straightforward way of going through visually, which is nice because there's something in front of us, everyone can look at it. And especially if you print these off, you can then have a number of these ordered by time over a year that you can go in and take a look at all these pieces here. Robert, what is the program called on the screen at the moment? This is called Procreate. And Procreate is on iOS as far as I know. I don't know if it's on Android. Thanks for the question. Got something on the chat. Just want to make sure. Yep. Okay. Thanks so much, Susan, for directing Robert there. Awesome. So we go about this. We would take a look at the actions. And depending on how you want to do this, the way I do it is I would take a look at all these specific minuses, so to speak. Take a look at all these, especially with the quality of life. And I would say, out of all these quality of life aspects, which one of these is actually the weakest link right now? Which one is the lowest? And again, I use that that life wheel assessment where you would take each one of these quality of life statements, so you'd have a Q of L, and you get a sense of where it is on the scale. And usually what I do in between spot checks is I focus on the one that's the weakest. So hypothetically, if this is the case, it looks like this one and this one, because there's two minuses, probably might be the issues. And so we'd look at those and we'd put some effort into one of those two areas. And I'll show you what that looks like on the spreadsheet. It's just a bit easier to see. Oop. Lots of chatting going on. Ah, great. Thanks, Susan. Awesome. Cool. So that's a graphic way of doing a spot check. Now I'm going to show you a spreadsheet way of doing a spot check. I'm going to give you guys access to this spreadsheet. This is 5 years of innovation, and there's a little bit of logic involved in this, so it works out really nicely. So I'm going to bring up that spreadsheet and then share you guys on the screen. And so you guys should be seeing the spreadsheet right now. So the way the spreadsheet works, so you get a sense of it, is we've got at the bottom here, I'm just going to put my spotlight on so you can see it. Down here, we've got 4 different sheets. We've got spot check single, spot check multiple, decision testing single, and decision testing multiple. And actually, I've created a back-end thing here for all you fine folks. So I'm just going to copy the link. So if folks want to follow along in real time, you guys can. So that should be it there. And you should be able to copy the entire folder into your own folder. But you won't be able to change anything within here, just so we hold that for everybody else. So when you get into this document, if you're interested, this is the holistic context spot check and decision-making client _ version 4.0. When you get in there, you're going to see a Dropbox link, and that's going to lead to an Excel form. If you don't have Excel, I apologize. This was built in Excel. The reason why it's not on Google Forms is that there's some logic in here that doesn't transfer when you go into Google Sheets. And I haven't figured out a way to do it yet. One of you is exceptionally gifted at Google Sheets and has a way to transfer all the information and all the rest of it. Fantastic, but it's not within my skill purview. So let's take a look at spot check multiple. So I'll show you one of the reasons why I do this in the spreadsheet. So here you can see Jim, Mary, and James. So that's our three decision makers, primary decision makers. And here on the left-hand side, we've got our context, our context or our goal. So we have statement of purposes in red, quality of life is in blue, behaviors and systems is in green, and future indicators is in purple. The name of the whole under management would go here. Folks who want more information, you can click up here because that'll take you to some of the work I've done. Some of the innovations on this is that every single one of these cells, if you have Excel, again, if you don't, some of this functionality won't work. You click on it and you can say yes or no. Also, within each of the quality of lives, I've put another type of spot check in here is I've put an indicator of the life assessment wheel, and the life assessment wheel for each of these individuals is up here. So for Jim, he said it was an 8, and sure enough, here on finances, it's an 8. For Mary, it's a 10. For James, it's a 10. And they also have the ability to say that, is this indeed true right now as a spot check? We are unlimited by our financial standing, have a healthy cash flow, and payment to and from us is made joyfully on time. So as they go down, they're basically going through this first run, and this is how I recommend doing this. Just go down and say, is this true or is this not currently true? So this could actually be yes or no or true or false. So go down and quickly ask Jim, Mary, and James, say the statement, is this true for you, Jim? Yes. Is this true for you, Mary? Yes. Is this true for you, James? Yes. And then going down, is this true for you? Is this true for you? And basically you go down and you create this entire conversation where each of these is true or not true. And then in this situation, this iteration, future resources were at the bottom. I actually really like keeping future resource bases with the quality of life that they are addressed to. This was a previous iteration. Then after you get to no, every single no goes down to what is the root cause articulation. So why is it a no? These folks have said see below. And as you go down to accurate accounting processes, current system isn't accurate and easy. Explore Excel sheet or Mac program. Great. Timely and transparent client process. Good ideas, not enough follow through. Process isn't clarified. Revisit website and canned email responses. So really it gives you a sense of what's not true and what do you need to do. And then as you come back, some things have been worked upon in the results category. So abundant cash flow, lack of funds due to client holdback and possibility of dropping a client, inquiry into lien on client, lost capital, learned a valuable lesson early in life. So didn't necessarily improve, didn't necessarily come to pass, but definitely learned something at the other end. Jackie, I think this is the coolest Excel sheet I've ever seen. I'm going to take that to the bank. Thanks, Jackie. I appreciate that. Question, how often do you do spot checks? Great question, Kevin. In a whole, like this one, so this was a group collaboration between me and a couple. Whenever we had our group meetings, we started with a spot check. And so it would either be monthly or bi-monthly. With myself, I do spot checks seasonally. I do them summer solstice, winter equinoxes, and New Year's Eve. But because Susan's coming, I'm going to be doing it earlier or later. I haven't decided yet. For you guys in the program, I want you to do this every single week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Yeah? Every single week I want you guys to work on this because you guys need as much experience as possible. Kevin, do you recommend weekly decision-making meetings? As far as I remember, Kevin, you're managing something like over 4,000 acres. You have a bunch of people together. I would say probably, yeah. If things are really tight, if there's issues going on, this is basically checking the heading. If you want to think of it that way, this is checking the heading on your entire organization. Are we headed in the right direction? For some people, depending on how many action items you have between decision-making, this can be really tenuous, I would say. So also consider how much, especially if you're in the lead, I imagine, just because I know you, Kevin, if you're not in the lead, you're probably close to the top. Be careful because you can overload folks. So I'll show you a way of making specific about what to work on. So I was working with a client, and they had a great, this is the single version. They had we did a great example here. So this is Mr. S. And so what I like to do, especially because of the quality of life statements, and I talked about this before, I like to take a look at the one that is the lowest, or the one that they feel is the biggest issue. And so for them, it was community. I'm a strong and active community member. It was a 3 of satisfaction. It was a no. I don't actively seek out connections. Then as we went down to behaviors and systems, he did seek out community, but he didn't make time to engage with community as a member. Not a priority. Don't reach out first. And by next week, I just got to move something to read this here, we'll reach out and attend an event. And he did indeed do that, and that did indeed improve this to a 4. So what I like to do, if you're looking at improving from week to week, I like to take a look at the quality of life, the category, if you will, that is the lowest. Because again, if you move a 3 to a 4, that's 1/3 improvement. Or if you move a 1 to a 2, that's 100% improvement. What I do is I highlight it in the spreadsheet, and then as I come back the next week, I then type in what the result was. And so the result for this guy was better for it, happy with result, working on attending more events. Okay. Now, here's something I haven't been able to program into Excel spreadsheet, which is why I think a program is actually necessary, and I'm evaluating if a program is necessary all the time, is I like to keep old spot checks and old decisions to the right, and I like to keep new decisions and spot checks to the left. So again, if you have Excel, what I like to do is take the blank copy to the right, copy all the columns, copy, go in between G and H, so I highlight H, insert copied cells, and now I have a brand new blank sheet that I can start to fill out. That means the old are to the right, the new are in front. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I'm just going to undo that. Spinning wheel of death. Oh, seriously, spinning wheel of death. This is, I obviously should not have undone this. All right. We may need to force quit. All right, let's force quit. Bring it back up. No, we're definitely not sending you any more information about me, Microsoft, ever. Okay, trying again. Aha, great success. Good. So spot checks. Hopefully that makes sense. Quick and easy way to go through, quick and easy way to understand what's going on within an organization and an enterprise, and allows you to move forward in a very easy, linear fashion. Sven, where is it in Google Drive in the spreadsheet? Having some difficulty finding things. So the link that I posted has 3 documents. And if Susan or others can repost, that'd be great. And as you see here, here's the 3 documents. I'm going to go on to these in a moment. You're going to click on this. This is going to lead you to a Dropbox link, which will give you access into a Dropbox that I have. And if you click on this, which I haven't actually, excuse me, I haven't turned into a full link. Oh my goodness. There we go. Let's turn it into a link. There we go. All you have to do is click on that, and that'll take you to the work that we're taking a look at now. So click on that, and up it'll come. Great. Thanks, Sven. Great question. Okay. So that takes care of the spot check. And with the last 30 minutes, I want to go through a decision-making process. So again, within the sheet, if you're interested, there's a single option, and then there's a multiple option. So here we've got decision testing single. We have decision testing multiple. And as I was talking about before, I'm going to walk you through an actual decision that Wood and Water Land Design had to process. An opportunity to work on a conventional client and present alternative regenerative options for a landscape design on a 10,000 square foot house. Okay, so I'm going to speak a little bit about the logic within this spreadsheet. So you actually don't touch this at all. Anything within the categories, if there's ever an I don't know or a no, the testing outcome will automatically fail. And the reason for this is that, again, every decision is wrong until proven right. So there's obviously something within this answering schema that hasn't been proven right. And so this is the big red flag to tell you, go take a look at the issue and make sure that it works completely. I'll explain these other things when we get to the end of this conversation. So what we do is, as we're going through and working this process, there's the root cause question. And if you hover over any of the questions, you're going to have the larger question come up. If I'm considering taking an action to solve a problem, does it address the root cause of the problem? There is no root problem. The decision most likely does not need to be engaged with. Ask why 5 to 7 times to get to the root cause of the problem. So just gives you an update of that question, little reminder. So currently, no root cause to solve. So kind of begs the question, why are we looking at this? Right direction question, check holistic context. So go through and take a look. So basically what I do, you can do whatever you like, but what I do is down here below the questions, what I do is I put all of my context so I can go down and go point by point and see if these are true or not true. So that's what we did. We went down and we started to answer some questions. We answered, here we go. We answered statement of purpose. We exist to mindfully collaborate and create regenerative, human-supporting ecosystem solutions to grow joyfully and inspired lives together to wake up, kick ass, and repeat. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. This is a huge conventional build. No ecosystem solutions here. James, what they said. So what do we need? Well, I'm keen on the profit. If the SOP fails, is there any need to go further? It's a good point. And James, nope, we're done here. For transparency's sake, Javan is James. I've changed the names to keep the others anonymous. So down we go. We go down to quality of life. We are unlimited by our financial standing. No. Joyfully. How will we know if we're joyful? This actually points to the fact that we need to change this context. How do we know that people are making payments to us joyfully on time? So it was a good question, checking with other contractors of the company. Are they paid on time? Do they work with them? Does this company that we might be contracting to, do they have good conversations? So it gave us that ability. Now we get into our behaviors and systems. These are all true. Communication of our expectations and advances, past, present, and future. Accurate accounting processes. This decision doesn't really apply to accurate accounting processes. Offer an abundance of value to create ecstatic clients. I don't know. Does this really fit with our happy client conversation? So what we did is we actually went back and we checked in with our clients and kind of talked with them about this. And we found that, really, we don't know if the lawyer who brought ATMs into gas stations in Canada, which was who the client was here, is actually going to be ecstatic about anything we do, because this is actually more a vacation rental. So this actually doesn't apply to how we want to work with people. So already we're seeing some issues. Question here, do you have to write something under why for yeses? You don't, but it's nice to get some information. If it's an I don't know or no, my recommendation is always to put something underneath the why. And if it's an I don't know, put whatever new information is needed. So that's the way I take a look at this. So anyways, we go through the whole piece and we say yes, we say no. And the great thing is the logic of this, if anything up here comes up no or I don't know, this will automatically come up as failed. Okay, right direction. That's right direction. Future resource base. Also future indicators, same conversation. So just taking a look, this is an older sheet, and so this should actually read future indicators. Just redo this now. Oh no, I'm gonna have to save this. We'll see if that drops us. Future indicators. Always improving. Energy, money, source, resource. Hours of units required to take on this client. 400, 450 estimates. Money required to facilitate this work. Estimates 45,000, 30,000, 55,000. It should be known that Jim was most accurate in estimating. Source, client payment. Use, furthering our goals. So just gave us a sense of what this means for us and how we're going to use it. Weak link. Social, will it address a pre-existing weak link? Yeah, more networking, bigger clientele. Will it create a weak link? I don't know. It could create a reputation issue. If we start doing these bigger homes that already have actually a lot of ecological issues, this home displaced water because it was 10,000 square feet to the point to where they actually created a watershed issue. If we're working for these people, does that actually negatively affect us? This was a good, really important piece. Economic, does it address a weak link? For sure. Does it create one? No. And you'll see that some of the logic in here, if you say no to a weak link, creates one, it's actually a positive. Because if it creates a weak link and it's a no, that's actually a positive. So you'll see that there's some reverse logic here. Ecologically, addresses an existing weak link. Ecological footprint of the building is enormous. This is a huge project with a huge footprint. It's a big negative impact here. What's the positive? Does it create a weak link? Yeah, huge footprint. Profitability. So we were taking a look at potential to profit. Gut feeling. Gut saying no, but profit is appealing. Doesn't fit with us or myself. So we've gone through the questions, quick and easy. Popped up as failed. Action taken. Proceed with action to take on client and project, being very aware of failed testing questions. So this is you. This is you entering in this conversation, saying what you're going to do here. Indicators. Positive. What are the positive indicators that we made a good choice here? Happy with choice, love the work. Negatives. We keep coming back to the failed testing questions. And sure enough, 3 months later during a spot check, we reassessed the decision, canceled the work, and all of context and decision makers were better for it. So the reason why I use this example is because we went ahead with a failed decision, came back to it, improved it, and we were actually better off for it. And for me, that's a really important piece. You know, it's great to do things that are always passing, but actually the failures are the more important ones. If you're using Excel and you follow the bouncing red ball, you go up to the top, and you take a look at this little red, this little plus sign. If you click on it, one of the pieces of logic that I got into the spreadsheet is that you can have other decisions. So if you have multiple options, you can put the multiple options directly into the spreadsheet. So this decision or this decision or this decision, etc. You press minus, and if you don't need those, you don't need to worry about them. To the right, again, is a blank sheet. So just as before, you can copy and paste this, put this in front, have new decisions and old decisions. And then, of course, we're always putting in the date, putting in the current year, because I keep decision spreadsheets for each year that I work. So that way I can come back and take a look at the year conversation. That is the spreadsheet. That's the way I do it. I'm going to show you a long format that a couple of holistic managers put together. How do you add more decision makers? You copy and paste the columns, I would imagine. And then you'd probably mess about with the formatting, Kevin. I imagine that's probably the easiest way to do it. I'm going to try it now, but I'm not going to save, and we'll see if that actually works. Insert copied cells. There you go. Easy peasy. Simple. It's going to be a little bit more difficult on the spot check if you want all the logic to work. So something to keep in mind. Do I actually say undo? I'm going to try it. Undo. Let's see if it'll work. Spinning ball of death. No. Well, it doesn't matter. We're going someplace else. Okay. So let's take a look at coming into this conversation. So we're into that folder. And here we are. We've got a short form and we've got a long form. I'm going to explain the long form because once you understand the long form, the short form will be easy. So here we are in the long form. And this was originally created down in, I believe it was Mexico. Actually, I think I already had this opened. I don't have to open it twice. Ah, very good. So, yeah, it was down in Latin America. I think Darren actually knows these folks. So what you would do if you wanted to use long format, more specific, project whole. So what is it? Who are the people involved? What's the date? What's the proposed action? So what's the decision itself? If there is a problem, go directly to cause and effect. What are the alternatives that we're going to put here? And then start going through the decisions. So right direction. And what you'll find is the results here at the bottom. So basically, if you were to answer this, you would say this was a pass, this was a fail, this is an I don't know, so you'd write pass, let's say. Cause and effect, how does this action address the root cause? Pass, fail, no. Weak link, Biological, we've seen this before. This is just a long format. Sustainability, it's actually the future indicator, future resource-based question. Marginal reaction, which action provides the greatest return in terms of your holistic context for the time, money, and efforts expended. Reason why I got rid of this question is that if you're doing the entire holistic context analysis, this is actually already answering this question, so I didn't think that this was necessary. Gross profit analysis, which enterprise contributes to the most. We talked about this, and this is the gut check. So these were the original wordings. I like the end of this because this really gives a lot more conversation about what's the decision. Monitoring, if we're wrong, what's the most subtle indicators? Wonderful wording here. If we're right, what will be the indicators? What will be some social, some economic, some ecological indicators? Further action, what further information, knowledge, or research must we do? What additional steps must be taken prior to determining the appropriateness of this action in order to refine and make it more likely to lead towards our holistic goal? So what might we do to make it even more economically, ecologically, or socially sound, or considering in future action? So I like this because it actually says, if we're going to improve this decision as is, even if it's past, let's improve it. Let's take the next step to actually make it even better. And so the long format is great, especially if you're trying to learn and understand all these pieces. And one of the things that I'll do, especially with a group of folks, is I'll use a graphic to compare the context. I'll use a long format, and I'll take this information. So I'll take all of these pieces and I'll actually transfer it into the Excel document, because sometimes that can be just as useful, is to have this documented in a way that is quite easy to go back and compare and take a look at. Good friends of mine, Rob and Michelle Avis, they actually have these printed out. They love hard copy. They love binders. So they have this all printed out in binders, and, you know, they're not nomadic as I am. And so I tend to keep everything in electronic format, but you could do both. You could do either. It's totally up to you. So here we are, we're at the end of the content conversation. We've gone through how to actually go through a decision, how to do a spot check, how to take a look at all these pieces. And the main thing I want you to take away from here is that once we have our context, we can start to test decisions. And really it's a Venn diagram. So here's our context, here's our decision, and sometimes that decision will have a great overlap. You know, sometimes it'll have little overlap. And this is really about going piece by piece and kind of starting to understand this. Some of you might have a lot of personal resistance to going through this point by point. Totally get it. When I first learned about this, I definitely felt that way. I felt like this was a lot of work. How could there possibly be a great output? Then I saved $45,000 on a decision that I could have made that was very problematic. And quite quickly I said, okay, this is worth the time, the money, the energy. I'll put some energy into this. And that then brought me into taking a look at my context pretty routinely, about improving my context routinely, because it continually improved my life. So again, evidence-based. Does this improve the context? Does this improve my life? Does this improve the things that I want to have? Does this improve my land base? And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, great. Again, caution, if you only use this for a week and you go, it doesn't work, you don't really know. You haven't given it a fair test. And so that's why I really recommend a 6-month test. And so here's what I suggest you do for the next 7 weeks of the course. Build your context, put it into the spreadsheets, or create a graphic. Put a time down on the calendar every single week, same bat time, same bat channel. Connect with your decision makers and test every single week. This goes for the panelists as well. As if it's been a while since you've practiced using your context in great rapidity, go for it. Test, 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 test. As decisions come up and they test, or you have questions, this is the cool thing about being in the Rex, there are a number of us that actively use our context. So you can reach out, you can say, this is weird, I don't quite understand how this worked, or do you think there's something missing here? And we can actively give you some feedback. That's the great thing about this whole process. So if folks have 1 or 2 decisions that they want to run by after they've done the work, we're not here to do the work for you. But if you have a way of documenting it, it has to be easy to read. If you want to use the spreadsheet, use the spreadsheet. If you want to use the long format, use the long format. But you have to show us your work. If you don't show us all your context and if things are true or not true, we can't help you. But if you show that, chances are a few of us can take a look at it, or if you direct us directly to a specific statement that you're concerned about, we can help you as well. So my recommendation for Thursday, because we've got a bit of time, Thursday my time, Friday your time, unless Thursday's your time as well, is to take a look at a decision, to test a decision, and see how it works for you. If you can do 1, do 2. If you can do 2, do 3. If you can do 3, do 4. Every time you test a decision, your context gets better. Every time. Because every time you test it, you have to say, is this true? You actively have to go back to it. One question I would add at the end of a decision making or a spot checking, especially because it's new to me and I love it from Dan, is after you do a spot check, ask if everything's true. And there's only been like 3 times that a spot check has been totally true for me, which brings me back to a really important piece, which I'll get to in a second. Ask the question, am I miserable at all? So if everything's true, ask, am I miserable? And if so, what needs to be true for me not to be miserable, which is your next quality of life statement for the context of the whole you're managing. That's a really important piece. If everything's true, you re-ask and you re-engage and you regenerate the context. So that's a pretty important piece because we're always trying to improve this process. We're always trying to be better managers of our own wholes, of the projects we work on the lives that we're trying to create for ourselves and for others. So it's a good piece to come into bear because it helps us to improve. So with that, I see that there's a question and a point from Susan. Be careful also of avoiding the work when you realize you've made a decision you wouldn't have made if you've been using a decision-making process, including land purchases, relationship, enterprise. When it gets bumpy, it's way more comfortable to discard the process than to recognize and sit down a decision you've made that ultimately didn't work out with what you really want. Great point, Susan. Really good point. Robert, I feel like approaching the long format initially may be less overwhelming. Does that appear logical to you? It doesn't have to appear logical to me, Robert. If it appears logical to you, fantastic. The point is, whatever feels easier, if you want to do the whole thing with a graphic and just the questions beside you and print them off, go for it. I had a client who liked the spreadsheet idea but hated the spreadsheet. So he took the old, he had old like, long accounting ledgers. You can do this with 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17 grid paper I'm looking at right here. And what he did is he cut off the first page. He put the questions and the spot check, and then every page after that was a way of actually going back and writing it in. So he did it in hard copy because he felt like that was the way to do it. Completely up to you guys. However it is that works for you, please go ahead. So Robert, I really appreciate that the initial might be less overwhelming. I'm sure if we took a poll, some folks would feel that it was less overwhelming and more overwhelming. This is just a way of bringing holistic thinking to folks in a tool format, and none of this is specific. And I think that's where a lot of folks have taken a holistic management course. You know, over the last 3 years, 60% of my clients have been ex-HM workshop participants who saw the value in it, but didn't have a process to create it. And they're like, I've done it, but I'm confused. And what the hell was Alan talking about? And he's a brilliant guy. I love him, but I don't understand this piece. And what the heck is a form of production? It's so confusing. And so I've worked with a number of these folks, and basically I say time and time again, you know, do what you want. And there's been a couple of really innovative ways of doing it. Some folks created an entire wall where they did the decisions live, and then they took photos of it and they took those photos as documentation. Great. You know, if that works for you, fantastic. If it doesn't work for you, then switch it up. Doesn't need to be anything specific, but I really do recommend that you take the time to work with it. If you don't, I think you'll be like others. And I think Darren has a great story about how he was over at Bill Mollison's place and he was like, what's this book? And he's like, oh, that's holistic management. It's not worth your time. And years later, he goes back, he goes, this is totally worth my time. And it may take a couple of times for people interacting with you or you interacting with holistic context to go, yeah, they talked about it. It seemed difficult. It seemed frustrating. I didn't do it. And years go by and years go by and years go by and you decide to pick it up and all of a sudden, bam, you've got it. You're using it. It's of value. It's doing the work it needs to do. So it does take time to develop, but it's an important thing to develop. It's been my experience. And as I said, right at the first call, if I could go back, I would have made this first. I would have gone back and made a context. I would have saved an incredible amount of time and money. I would have saved a couple of relationships, professional and personal. I would have been a lot farther on. if I had had a real specific way of looking at decisions, because I wasn't taught how to make decisions as a child or as an adult. No one came by and said, this is how you make them. My parents didn't make really good decisions, nothing against them, but they didn't do any sort of cognitive process. So this is all of us, in my mind, evolving as human beings. We've taken ourselves out of nature. It's very hard to evolve further physically when we've taken ourselves out of nature. We're de-evolving in many physical ways, but culturally, this is one way to evolve. And it'll be interesting from an epigenetic sense if the practice of actually making the decisions has a reverse physical effect, as a number of things do, as we've seen in the study of epigenetics. So with that, we are at 1:54. And I just want to thank everyone for all the work that they've given to me thus far. I had a chance to go through most of what was sent to me this morning at Workplace. I'll look again before Thursday at least once, if not twice. Take a look at whatever you've sent and try and get back to you as much as I can. Any specific questions? I have to say this a lot. Almost all of you I have the same response for. Make sure you have no decision inside your context. No hours, no dates, no times, no duration. I'm going to be on the farm in a year. Take a step back, ask, what's the quality of life behind that? I want to be secure. I don't want to be frustrated, whatever that might be. So that's the main comment. The second comment is, after you feel good about your context and you feel that's great and you're wanting further feedback, don't just send it back to say, take a look at this again. Be specific. If you're specific, I can be specific. Anybody here can be specific in our review, and you can go farther. The more vague, more general you are, the more vague, more general we are. So the more specific you are, the further you can go. If you have a specific decision, if there's a specific aspect, would love to help you folks through that. So unless there's any other questions, Chelsea, what is the best way to send docs to look over? Private message. Private message. Private message. It's daunting because there's like 35 new messages, but much more useful for me because I go, okay, great. I've seen that one. I've seen that one. I've seen that one. I've seen that one. I find the notifications I have problems with. I'm not saying everybody's like this. Probably much of you are much better at Workplace than I am, but that really helps me in terms of organization. So thanks. Thanks there, Chelsea. So just to wrap us on up to the end of the call, just like the beginning of the call, we talked about successes. End of the call, I want everybody to write down one thing they took away from decision-making. Could be an aha moment, could be a new idea, could be a new process, a new thought, a new conversation. I want everyone to write down at least one thing they're taking away from this session. Some idea, some thought, some process. The fact that Javan makes exceptionally beautiful Excel sheets, totally open to that kind of praise. But one piece that you'd like to make sure that's out there into the world. And as you guys put them down, I'll read them off, and then I'll hand it back over to Mr. Darren Doherty to close us out in week 3 of your Agrarian session. And again, so glad that everybody showed up. Thank you for all the questions. It was so great to have them. Thanks for everybody sending their thanks and their gratitudes. I really appreciate that. That's a huge piece there. And just thanks for doing the work, because it's a pretty important piece. Okay, Kevin, ruthless clarity of vision. Tom, the tool is self-honing, but it needs to be practiced to do so. Susan, I'm going to be on a cognitive dive into how better calmer decisions is going to drive an epigenetic tsunami. Oh, Susan, we've got a potential Science of Permaculture podcast topic. We are profitable. We do not subsidize. Neil Bertrando. Yeah, great one. Aristi, holistic management is vital for my happiness and satisfaction in life. Yeah, I would say use of this concept. Wonderful Excel forms. A big thanks for that. You're welcome, Andrew. Andy, ruthless clarity of vision. Diego Barbosa. Oh, what a wonderful name. I totally got ripped off on the name category. That's awesome. It was really mind-opening, and I'll dive into the decision-making process. Thanks so much, Diego. I love it. Ryan, like mycelial leading edges, the HC tool can explore new neural networks, formation and strengthening. Absolutely. Huge piece. Huge piece. I could go on and on about the metaphor analogies within mycology, but we'll leave it there. Ernest, ruthless clarity of vision. Stephen, we are profitable and don't subsidize. Practice makes perfect. Hans, yeah, if you guys are keen on those principles, check out Diego Footer's podcast. And if you guys are interested, we'll be running a level 1 in the fall of next year. Chris Moore, it's an iterative process that never ends until we die. Yeah. Robert, you love the name Pablo. I just like having bad accents. Not saying that the name is bad, just my accent is. Lara, negative scanning is not critical thinking. We have lots of work to do. Thanks so much for the formats. You're welcome. Really glad that they're going to be of useful. Yeah, I've lost my ability to speak apparently. Come on, Javan, and treat us with your myco-philosophy. I can't do it in 60 seconds, man. Just won't do it justice. But we'll get there at some point. I'm sure we can do a bonus session at some point. Folks, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for staying till the end and listening. Really looking forward to working with all of you when and where able. And yeah, thanks again. Darren, you're amazing. Thanks for putting this group together and just doing the work you do. It's why we're here.
Oh, it's all incredibly passive, of course. Thank you, mate. Great work. I did get a note from one of my clients on the side. I don't know why he didn't post it here. He did say that he thought that the stuff was fairly complicated that you'd put forward today. And I suppose was wondering how he could use all of the stuff that you were talking about. And I suppose my response to that would be is that sometimes it's as you get with any training or when anything new is being brought to you, it's really great to see the full scope. And if you want to pare that onion down so that it's the kind of onion you put in your pan, well then if it ends up being an escallion as opposed to the whole onion and that works for you and it tastes good, then that's the way it is. So that's the way I would look at. I mean, and I think that's perhaps what Robert was getting to too, is that when you look at a full-blown spreadsheet with all of those fields to answer, etc., it is going to take a bit of time, and it may be something that you do at the start, but then, or you just rationalize in your own way. But I think it's really important to realize that when you're doing this kind of thing, it's really good to have the full palette on display and then do your own take homes. Yeah. But realize that there's the nuts and bolts that are important.
I think there's two pieces there, and I appreciate that they sent you a note. One, slim it down to what feels accomplishable. There's some great research about this, is that consistency over intensity, or lower the bar. So if you want, just take your statement of purpose and a decision and test against your statement of purpose. That's pretty simple. Take one decision against one statement of purpose and take that as the only decision testing question. If you find there's value in that and you want to go further, great, go further. So one way is just to slim down the whole process. Just do statement of purpose and quality of life statements, for example, or take a look at the questions and take the one you think is most valuable or important. You won't be getting the full value, you won't be getting the full benefit, but let's take out the nastiness of it, which is it feels daunting. The second way, or not even second way, but another way or complementary way, is to really take a look personally about how you are motivated. So some folks are motivated by carrots, and some folks are motivated by sticks. And there's a third option, which I'll talk about. But if you're motivated by a carrot, if you know at the other end there's something really valuable, that might help with the motivation of going through the process, of going through the hard work. So I would stick to the idea or the conversation, or speak to folks within the circle here within Regrarians who have used context and improved their lives, saying, who's done it? I'd like to hear success stories, because that will help to create the motivation within yourself to create the carrot. People have improved themselves. Other side, so stick. So the other way is to talk to folks, myself included, where there has been a stick, there's been a negative outcome of not working with context. And every time I make a decision that I think is intelligent, I don't need to use my context, I've always missed something. And most recently, within the last year, I left about $6,000 on the table for an exchange that I had with a client. And it's not that it wasn't available, it's not that it wasn't there, I left it because I didn't actually go through the process. So carrots and sticks. The third process, or the third conversation, is actually becoming the carrot yourself and realizing, and this is sort of the evolution, I guess, is realizing that you will become a more worthwhile, valuable manager and decision maker if you go through the process. So it's actually you becoming the carrot and realizing that you're going to build the skill necessary to become a better manager at the hole you're in. So if that helps, great. If it doesn't, chuck that out too and just make it as simple as possible.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, that's great. Thank you, mate. And I'm glad you were able to make it today and give us all an improved version, of course, on what's going on. You are Mr. Kensei after all. All right.
Thanks,
well, also thank you so much to the panelists from the team today. Chris Moore, who's happily with his pigs and children. I don't know which more than the other, and perhaps his clients at times as well. Dan Harris Pascal, who's with his new baby. Congratulations, Dan, and to his wife, and hopefully Giles going really well, and Mum. Susan Casano, who's in California, getting cooler, and Tom LeBlanc, who is also in California, hopefully getting some rain soon, and getting all of those plantings established that you've been working on as part of the fire recovery efforts there. So, and thank you to all of you who came along today. This, of course, will be immediately converted into podcasts and syndicated widely amongst the workplace. So thank you very much, and good day to you all.
Take care.